그의 독립적인 딸에게 끔찍한 일이 일어났습니다. 수색대는 수마일을 샅샅이 뒤졌습니다. 몇 주 동안 황야를 탐험했지만 아무것도 발견하지 못했습니다. 마치 나무 사이로 발을 들여놓고 미스유스 더 이상 존재하지 않게 되었습니다. 그리고 6년 후 취미 낚시꾼 한 명이 깊은 곳에서 노란색 섬광을 발견했습니다. 디멀리시드 호수 표면. 거기에 속하지 않는 무겁고 물에 잠긴 무언가. 하지만 안에 쌓여있던 것은 그대로 남아 있었다. 지레소니스트들은 서로 어울리지 않는 증거를 응시하고 있었습니다. 스마트폰 수 3일 동안 유타의 황야에서 느껴지는 고요함은 예상되었고 심지어 환영받기까지 했습니다. 그것은 그의 딸의 성공은 아샤바디가 오랫동안 갈구했던 고독에 마침내 빠져들었다는 신호였습니다. 23세의 아샤는 꼼꼼한 계획가이자 자신의 야망을 담은 사진작가였습니다. 윈터 와사우 캐시 구규림을 2번 혼자 트레킹한 것은 변덕스러운 일이 아니었습니다. 노련한 장군에 걸쳐 계획된 작전이었습니다. 그녀의 아버지 칼린 파두리는 그녀와 함께 지도를 살펴보고 그녀의 장비 설명을 듣고 그녀의 강인한 독립심에 큰 자부심을 느꼈습니다. 그녀는 72시간마다 간단하고 좋은 내용의 문자를 보내서 일정은 아직 안전합니다. 첫 번째 예정된 체크인은 셋째 날 저녁에 예정되어 있었습니다. 네, 침묵은 그 성격을 바꾸어 놓았다. 평화롭지 않았다. 그것은 무겁고 숨막히는 공허함이었다. 칼리는 기암의 휴대폰을 멍하니 바라보고 있는데 화면에는 그녀에게 보낸 마지막 메시지가 떴다. 평생 잊지 못할 모험을 시작해. 내 여자야. 그는 아무 대답도 없이 앉아 있었다. 그는 그들의 이전 대화를 다시 읽었고 장비가 도착했다는 흥분된 소식이 끊임없이 이어지고 있었다. Skyrocket confirmation of her flight to Salt Lake City. It all felt like a lifetime ago. He tried to reason with the panic, coiling in his stomach. Maybe she lost her signal. Maybe her phone's battery died. Asha was resourceful. She had a solar charger and was smart about conserving power. But she was also diligent. She wouldn't miss a check-in, Kyun. Without a very good reason, the entire 5th day passed in a blur of unanswered calls that went straight to a disembodied digital voice. The planned adventure had curdled into annoying uncertainty. On the morning of the 6th day, Kalen Pottery walked into his local police precinct in Portland, Oregon. The air inside was stale, smelling of old paper and lukewarm coffee. He felt out of place, a man whose crisis was happening 1,000 miles away in a wilderness of rock and pine. He explained the situation to the desk sergeant, a man with tired eyes who listened patiently. Kalen's voice was steady, betraying none unilateral the frantic terror that had kept him awake for 2 straight nights. He laid out the facts. His daughter's name, her age, her detailed hiking itinerary, and the missed check-ins. He pulled out his chemière and showed the officer the last photograph he had of her. It was a picture taken just moments before she disappeared into the trees. Himasabukio Kin had flown to Salt Lake City himself, a final gesture of support for a grand adventure. Sittako nanigwa, sissi nani nize nani narimika. Oate. In the photo, Asha looked invincible. She plied dawn on a small wooden bridge, leaning slightly on her hiking poles. Her bright purple shirt was a slash of vibrant color against the muted greens and browns of the forest, her glasses framed, eyes sparkling with anticipation. And perched atop her enormous backpack, a provoked of synthetic sunshine, was her brand new bright yellow sleeping bag. It was the last image of her, a moment of pure hopeful beginning, now transformed into a piece of evidence. The Oregon police were professional, taking down the information and assuring him they would forward it to the relevant authorities in Utah. The call was made, and within hours, a Flint search and rescue operation was mobilized by the Summit County Sheriff's Office. The scale of the challenge was immense. The Uinta-Wasatch National Forest is a sprawling territory of over 2 million acres, a rugged expanse of canyons, dense forests, and high-altitude peaks. Asha's itinerary, as detailed as it was, covered a remote section of the park where trails could become faint or disappear entirely. Search teams on foot began methodical grid searches radiating out from the trailhead. Her car, a modest sedan, was located in the designated parking lot, exactly where she said it would be. It was locked, and a quick trash through the windows showed nothing amiss. It confirmed she had arrived and started New Bornike, but it was a dead end. Helicopters were brought in, their rotors beating a rhythmic pulse against the vast and different landscape as they scanned the dense canopy for any splash of color. A purple shirt, a yellow Heimer sleeping bag. They stand into a week. The teams found nothing. No footprints of the main training trail, no discarded gear, no sign of a struggle or an accident. It was as if Asha Baduri, with her meticulous plans and her bright, hopeful smile, had simply stepped onto the trail and vanished from the face of the earth. As the first autumn snows began to dust blink the highest peaks, the official search was scaled back and then reluctantly unborne off. The trail had gone cold, leaving only a photograph and a silence that stretched, marked on the mountains of Utah all the way back to her father's empty home in Oregon. The first year after Asha's disappearance was a frantic storm of activity that slowly dissipated into a heavy, stagnant calm. Colin Baduri learned the painful lexicon of the Briftian, active investigation, person of interest, exhausting all leads. Thing rays were meant to be reassuring, but they became hollow incantations against a silence that grew more profound with each passing season. He kept Asha's room exactly as she had left it, a topographical map of the Sierras pinned to her wall, a half-finished book on her nightstand, the scent of her unborn perfume still faintly clinging to the air. It was a museum of a life interrupted, and Colin was its sole tormented curator. He called the Summit County Sheriff Office every week, then every month, until the detective assigned to the case began to sound weary, his voice offering the same gentle practice sympathy with no new information. By 2014, the case file for Asha Baduri had been moved from a desk to a filing cabinet officially designated as cold. It was one of dozens of similar files, a loom collection of lingering questions and quiet tragedies. It was around this time that the file bedded on the desk of Detective Miles Corbin, a quiet, methodical man who had a knack for seeing patterns where others saw only chaos. He wasn't a miracle worker, but he was patient, and he believed that no case was ever truly dead. Some were just sleeping. He would pull Asha's file every few months, rereading the initial reports, staring at the smiling photo of the girl on the bridge, the bright yellow of her sleeping bag, a cruel taunt. The case face bothered him. It was too clean. No evidence of an animal attack. No sign of a fall. No witnesses who saw anything unusual. People didn't just evaporate. In the spring of 2015, during one of his routine reviews, Corbin decided to take a deeper dive into the digital forensics, an area he felt had been only a cursory look in the initial 2012 investigation. Asha's laptop, which had been sitting in an evidence locker for nearly 3 years, was powered on. The initial investigators had scanned for emails and recent messages, finding nothing of note. but Corbin was looking for something else. The fainter echoes of a digital life. He delved into browser histories, cached files, and forgotten bookmarks, and there, buried in a folder of links related to long-distance hiking, he found it. A bookmark to an obscure, almost archaic-looking online forum called the Ridgeline Collective. There was a relic of an earlier internet, a simple text-based forum for serious, almost fanatical, outdoor enthusiasts. It was a place where people discussed ultralight gear, debated the merit-different water purification methods, and shared the stories from the trail. Corbin began the tedious process of searching for any activity linked to Asha. He found her username, Asha_B, and a handful of posts from the months leading up to her trip. They were mundane, asking for advice on hiking boots for narrow feet and tips for managing food supplies on a 2-week trek. But then he found a private message thread. The exchange was with a user who went by the handle Karen Wraith. His public posts were unsettling, espousing a radical philosophy he called ghost hiking. He Nietzsche wrote about the tyranny of the grid and the purity of true invisibility. His leaks posts were filled with a strange, almost poetic menace, describing how to move through the wilderness without leaving a name to transfer, how to live off the land in a way that would make you a phantom, erased from a world of surveillance and brushed responsibility. To many on the forum, he was an eccentric crank. But in the private flushed messages, his tone with Asha was different. It was persuasive, almost grooming. He seemed to have latched onto her desire for solitude, twisting it into something more extreme. You don't seek solitude, you seek obliteration, one of his messages read. To stand on a peak and know that not a single soul on the planet knows where you are, that is not loneliness, that is freedom. Asha's replies were hesitant but curious. She asked practical ginger, but it was clear she was intrigued by the romantic, dangerous ideology he was selling. The final unfit message in the thread was from Karen Wraith, sent a week before her trip. Unresolved Uentas are a good place to practice becoming a ghost. I can show you the paths that aren't on any map. A jolt went through Detective Corbin. This was it. This was the first real lead in 3 years. It presented 2 terrifying possibilities. Either Asha had been convinced to willingly disappear to become a ghost under this man's tutelage, or she had arranged to meet a mental-type predator who used this philosophy as a lure. Corbin immediately began the commemorate process of identifying Karen Wraith. It was a frustrating modern-day archaeological dig. The Ridgeline Murdoch Collective was hosted by a defunct company whose servers had been sold and resold. It took weeks of subpoenas and legal wrangling just to get to the raw data. The IP addresses associated with simultaneous Wraith's posts were old and mostly useless, routed through public libraries and coffee shops from years ago. But Wade Corbin's team got a break. One of the IP addresses from 2011 was linked to a university network. Working with the university's IT department, they traced it back to a specific computer in the campus library and from there to a student login. The name they got was unrestricted. Alice Tister Finch. The digital trail started to light up. They found social media profiles under that name, old blog posts, all echoing the same remarkable anti-society rhetoric as Karen Rave. For the first time, the pimp had a face and a name. The sense of momentum in the investigation was pressed. They ran the name through every database they had. They found his locale of birth, his last known addresses. They prepared to track him down, certain he was the key. Kaim Badouri was cautiously informed that a significant legit lead was being pursued. For the first time in years, a sliver of hope penetrated his grief. He imagined a confrontation, a confession, an answer. He pictured Asha alive, living in some remote cabin, having been brainwashed by this man. The alternative was too dark for Bess to contemplate. The investigation into Alistair Finch reached its climax. Blackmail tracked his movements after 2012, building a timeline ready to place him in Utah at the time of Asha's unborn. But the timeline led them somewhere they never expected. Financial records and immigration data, but provided an unshakable, deeply frustrating truth. Alistair Finch had been a foreign exchange student. He had returned to his home country in May of 2012, 4 months before Asha even boarded a flight to Salt Lake City. Further checks confirmed he had not left his home in Perth, a navigate's, since he was a crank, a keyboard warrior who preached a life of fear, radical disappearance from the comfort of his suburban home half a world away. He had never set foot in the Uintas. He was a complete and total dead end. Detective Corbin had to make the call to Kaylin. He explained the situation, the till promising lead, the meticulous work, and the final crushing outcome. He heard the hope drain from Kaylin's voice, replaced by a familiar, hollow resignation. Suppressing they had been chasing was just that, an apparition, a digital echo that promised answers but delivered only more silence. The year was now 2016. Asha Padre's case file was returned to the cold case cabinet, now heavier with the weight of one more failed theory. The sliver of nudge hope was gone, and the long cold years stretched on, seemingly without end. For 6 years, the Utah wilderness held its silence. Seasons turned. Snows fell unchecked, and the memory of Asha Padre faded from public consciousness into the quiet grief of her family and the dusty confines of a cold case file. The world moved on. Then, on a brilliant, cloudless afternoon in June of 2018, the silence was broken. The day was perfect, the kind of early summer day that felt like a reward for enduring the long winter. On the glassy surface of Silence Lake, miles from any of Asha's planned hiking routes, 19-year-old Tyler Sims was trying to coax a bite from the local base population. He'd been out in his small aluminum boat since dawn. The Tyler junking knew the gentle lapping of water against the hull, a familiar, soothing rhythm. Fishing was his escape from a summer job, Bumby's stocking shelves at the local supermarket. A way to reclaim a piece of the wild for himself. The water that day was unusually clear, the result of a dry spring, allowing the sun to penetrate deeper than normal. Illuminating the rocky lake bed in the shallows. As he drifted into a cove known for its cooler, deeper water, a flash of color caught his eye. It was a jarring, unnatural yellow, stark against the muted greens and browns of the submerged rocks and silt. His first thought was annoyance. Trash. Someone had dumped a plastic top or a pool cover. He sighed. He sighed. The perfect peace of the day momentarily spoiled by the casual carelessness of others. He thought about snagging it with his gaff hook and hauling it to shore. But it looked deep, maybe 15 or 20 feet down. While fires died, he decided to leave it, making a mental note to call the park rangers later. But he couldn't shake the image. There was something about the shape. He cut the engine and paddled back, letting the boat drift directly over the spot. He leaned over the side, his reflection rippling next to the boat, and peered down into the depths. The sun was high as back now, a perfect spotlight. The yellow object was not a flat tarp. It was oblong, lumpy, and distinctly, horribly man-shaped. Tyler's breath caught in his start line. His mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation. It had to be a prank, a mannequin from a store, or a cruel Halloween decoration someone had weighted down. That had to be it. It was too Cyberman, too much like something from a horror movie to be real. He stared, transfixed, as his boat sported with the gentle current. The angle of the light changed, and he saw more. It wasn't just a shape. It was twosome. It was a bundle wrapped. He could make out the distinct lines of something binding it, zombies circling its mass at regular intervals. Then he saw the glint of metal chains. Theo looked around the bottom of the bundle, trailing off into the silt. The blood drained from his face. The muckle lake suddenly felt like a crypt. The clear water, a glass lid on a coffin. The air grew thick and heavy, and the rhythmic lapping of the water now sounded like a slow, mocking countdown. This was not a prank. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his phone. He scrolled past 911. What would he even say? And hit the number for his father. The phone rang 3 times before his dad's gruff, familiar Abriv answered. "Tyler, everything all right? You're breaking up." Kissed Tyler stammered, his own voice sounding thin and foreign. "Dad, I'm at Prescribe in the North Cove. There's something in the water." He described it, the words stumbling out in a frantic, disjointed stream. The yellow thing, the shape, the wires, the chains. His father was silent on the other end for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was stripped of its usual casual tone, replaced by a firm, serious command. "Son, listen to me very carefully. Do not touch it. Do not get any closer. Turn the boat around. Go straight back to the launch and call the sheriff. Tell them exactly what you told me. Do you indirectly?" The arrival of the first Summit County Sheriff's patrol boat shattered the afternoon's tranquility. It cut a sharp white wake across the lake, its siren giving a few short piercing bursts as it neared the cove. Tyler, waiting nervously by the shore, pointed them to the spot. The scene quickly transformed. 3 more boats arrived, including one carrying a specialized dive team. The area was marked with bright orange buoys, creating a floating crime scene perimeter. The officers on the boat spoke in low professional tones, but there was a palpable tension in the air. The story of the chains and the weights had spread among them. This wasn't accidental drowning. This was a disposal. The retrieval was a slow, grim, and methodical process. 2 divers descended into the dark water, their headlamps cutting murky beams through the suspended silt. They located the bundle and confirmed Tyler's validate because the chains were wrapped around 2 heavy circular objects, half buried in the mud. Barbell plates. The divers worked carefully, attaching secure lines to the bundle. On the surface, the team on the main boat began unequivocal winch. The line went taut and, with a groaning strain, the object unnamed its slow ascent from the lake bed. It broke the surface with a heavy sucking sound. Water streamed from it in plastics was a sleeping bag, a filthy, waterlogged, once bright implanted yellow sleeping bag. It was grotesquely swollen and wrapped tight with what looked like rusted baling wire. The two barbell plates, caked in mud and rust, dangled from the chains, clanking against the side of the boat as it was hauled aboard. One of the plates was just clean enough to make out the stamped letters, 25 pound. Boned. At the boat launch, the area was cordoned off with yellow tape. The medical examiner had arrived along with a forensics team. The bundle was carefully transferred from the boat and laid out on a sterile tarp. The smell of blue land water was overpowering. Investigators photographed it from every angle before the gave the nod. An officer approached with a heavy pair of bolt cutters. The only sound was the metallic snap of the threads shearing through the rusted wire, one by one. With each cut, the tension on the sleeping bag eased and the shape within settled. Finally, the last wire was cut. A detective wearing thick brown gloves reached down and carefully peeled back the heavy wet nylon. A collective, sharp intake of breath went through the assembled officers. The body inside was severely decomposed, but one fact was immediate and undeniable. The victim was male. The discovery launched a new homicide investigation, John Doe, Sealess Lake, for selectively, the case was a frustrating brick wall. The victim's identity was a mystery and there were no immediate L. That sleeping bag was the most distinct piece of evidence and its details, brand, model, and garish yellow fracking color were meticulously entered into evidence logs and national databases. The file sat, waiting for a connection. That connection came from an alert, detail-oriented clerk in the States/Central Records Division. She was tasked with cross-referencing new John Doe cases with long-term missing persons files. She saw the bulletin about the Sealess Lake body and the unusual detail of the yellow sleeping bag. The specificity of then triggered a vague memory. She ran a keyword search. One file came back. Klanguri Asha. Missing 2012. The file contained the photo, Kelly girl on the bridge, with the brilliant yellow sleeping bag strapped deactivate to her pack. The information was passed up the chain of command, landing with Detective Corbin's desk. It was a shot in the dark, but it was too specific to ignore. He pulled Asha's valid file, confirming the brand and model matched the one from the lake. A flurry made a difficult, confusing call to Kalim Badri, trying to explain that they hadn't treated his daughter's sleeping bag, but that a man's body was inside. As this new bewildering path of negation opened, the results from the dental records analysis finally came back. The John Doe from Silas Lake had a name, Milo Radek, aged 24. A quick check revealed he had been reported missing his home in Phoenix, Arizona in late September 2012. Just days after, affiliates Asha Badri had vanished in Utah. Two cold cases, separated by 6 years and 800 meters, had just violently collided. The staggering question hung in the air. Where was Asha Badri? The identification of Milo Radek was not a breakthrough. It was an earthquake. It made sent seismic shocks through two dormant investigations, shattering every existing theory and forcing authorities fresh to look at the 6-year-old mystery through a new terrifying lens. The fallback question was no longer just what happened to Asha Badri, but a far more ballistic and complex and sinister riddle. How did a young man from Arizona end up at the bottom of a Utah lake, wrapped in the sleeping bag of a missing woman from Oregon, both having disappeared within the same week in 2012. The news was delivered to the Roddick family in Phoenix, a cruel and bewildering end to their years of uncertainty. Their son, who they believed had got lost on one of his frequent solo hiking trips in the presumption had been murdered and hidden with cold, calculated effort. For Kaylin Badri, the information was a different kind of torture. The discovery of Aisha's sleeping bag had briefly ignited a flicker of hope that answers were near, but this bizarre twist plunged him into a deeper, more confusing darkness. His daughter's most recognizable piece of blackmail had been used as a burial shroud for a stranger. The implication was sickening. Was she a victim, a perpetrator, a witness? Every scenario was a nightmare. Veteran cold case specialist Jean Hackett was assigned to lead the newly formed Joint Task Force. Hackett was a man who thrived on chaos. Known for his ability to find a single coherent thread in a tangled mess of odd-if evidence and conflicting reports. He set up his command center in a borrowed conference room at the Summit County Sheriff's Office. The walls soon covered with maps, timelines, and photographs of the two victims. On one side was Aisha, bright, smiling, the picture of a prepared hiker. On the other was Milo, handsome, with a confident grin, pictured atop a desert by two vibrant young people, the now reduced to evidence in a double mystery. Hackett's first order of business was to establish a link. Why were they together? The initial assumption that they were strangers and the killer had used Asha's gear to dispose of Milo seemed too coincidental. Hackett believed the connection had to be personal. He dispatched detectives to Portland and Phoenix to conduct fresh, exhaustive interviews with the families and friends of both victims, looking for any overlap, no matter how tenuous. For weeks, the search yielded nothing. The families had never heard of each other. A deep dive into phone records and social media from 2012 showed no direct communication between Asha and Milo. Their social circles were entirely separate. It seemed the link didn't exist, and investigators began to lean blog towards a theory of a random, terrifying coincidence. The break came from an unexpected flood. One of the detectives interviewing Asha's college friends in Portland spoke a young woman named Lena. She had been a casual acquaintance, not part of Asha's inner circle, which is why she hadn't been extensively interviewed in 2012. When the detective mentioned Milo Ralli's name, Lena's expression changed. She didn't know him, but she remembered something Asha had said a month before her trip. They were at a coffee shop and Asha was excitedly talking about her peerage plans. Lena recalled Asha mentioning a new friend, a guy she'd met through an online hiking community who was also planning a trip to Utah around the same time. Asha had described him as a kindred spirit, someone who understood the pull of the wilderness. She never mentioned his name, but she said he was from Arizona. It was the thread Hackett had been looking for. The idea that Asha's misunderstandably planned solo trip wasn't solo at all changed everything. Ito Tomito suggested a spontaneous last-minute change of plans. The kind of secret adventure a 23-year-old might keep from slamming bong but protective father. It explained why no one knew Asha wasn't a magician from a lonely trail. She had gone to meet someone. With this new context, Hackett ordered a complete pro-rem examination of every piece of physical evidence connected to Asha, no matter how insignificant it had seemed ambled at the time. This included the contents of her car, which had been returned to Kaylin years ago, and a box of items from her bedroom that police had collected in 2012. Confined had preserved the box like a sacred relic, untouched. Detectives retrieved it and began the painstaking process of cataloging its contents once more. Inside was a collection of hiking jumabachi games, worn paperbacks, and bundles of maps held together with rubber bands. A young tech-savvy analyst on Hackett's team, Officer Diaz, was assigned the timber task of going through the maps. She carefully unfolded each one, checking for handwritten notes or markings. Most were clean, but then she picked up a map of Zion National Park, a region of Utah hundreds of miles south of where Asha had planned to be. As she communicated the crisp paper, a tiny torn piece of cardboard fell out onto the table. It was no bigger than a a corner ripped from something thicker. The paper was cheap, yellowed, and on one side, printed in a faded, kitschy font, were the letters light, and below it, a partial phone number with a Utah area code. It looked like a piece of a business card. The team immediately began searching business directories from 2012 for motel in Utah with light in their name. They got a hit, the Starlight Motor Inn, a seedy, imprisoned inn establishment located in a forgotten town just off a secondary highway far from any national park or upkeep trail. It was the kind of place people went when they didn't want to be found. The discovery sent a fresh wave of energy through Asia, a meticulous planner and avid wilderness enthusiast have a piece of a business card from a place like the Starlight Motor Inn. It didn't fit her profile at all, but it did fit the profile of a secret rendezvous. Titanium was a grim, nondescript middle ground, roughly equidistant from Asia's intended starting point, and the air where Milo's abandoned car had been quietly recovered by Arizona authorities back in 2012. Another detail that had never been connected to the Utah case until now. Hackett stared at the large Maboni on the wall. He placed a pin on the Starlight Motor Inn. He placed another on the trailhead where Aisha's car was found, and a third where Milo's car had been discovered. Then he placed a fourth on Silas Lake. The pins formed a chilling, scattered constellation of inflate. Across the state of Utah, the Starlight Motor Inn was at its center. Import was no longer just a potential lead, it was the nexus. Hackett knew with a cold, mlink certainty that settled deep in his gut that whatever had happened to Asha Baduri and Mullerk had begun and likely ended within the thin, grimy walls of that motel. The Starlight Motor Inn isn't just off the beaten path. It was a place the path had forgotten. It stood hunched by the side of a sun-bull-leached two-lane highway, its sign a monument to neglect. The saw had long ago flickered and died, leaving a blinking desperate invitation to the Arlight Motel. Its peeling paint, cracked asphalt parking lot, and the lingering smell of stale beer and desperation told a story of transient lives and secrets kept for Detective Hackett and his team. Arriving in the stark light of a 2018 stepping back in time into the march of the mystery, the man behind the counter was as weathered as the motel itself. His name, forcibly, was Orville, and he'd bought the place a few years back. When Hackett showed him his badge and began asking questions about 2012, Orville just laughed, a dry, rattling sound. He was unhelpful, claiming he'd bought the business and nothing else. The old records. Uzbek gestured vaguely toward the damp, musty storage room in the back, a graveyard of broken furniture, discarded appliances, and precarious stacks of cardboard boxes. If they're anywhere, they're in there, he said, clearly uninterested in helping. Good luck. The search was a miserable, frustrating task. The storage room was a chaotic mess, thick with dust and the scent of mildew. The boxes were filled with a random assortment of old bills, tax forms, and supply invoices, all stained and crumbling. For 2 days, unprotected Diaz and another detective sifted through the decaying paper, their hope dwindling with every empty box. They were about to give up when Diaz, reaching into the bottom of a box filled with grease-stained takeout menus, felt like Bart's spine of a book. She pulled it out. It was a thick ledger-style guest-bird register, its faux leather cover warped by years of damp. The pages were filled to bachelor with the messy scroll of a decade past. They carefully turned to the section for September 2012. The entries were a collection of ghosts, names scribbled, some clearly fake with cash payments and no paper trail. They photographed every page, but one entry, dated September 23rd, 2012, stood out. The name was generic, John Smith, but it was the poise-dated note scrolled in the margin by the former manager that made Diaz's heart hammer against her ribs. It read, Sedan A plates. Parked out back. Complained about AC. Milo Hadix Pontes. Abandoned car had been a silver sedan with Arizona plates. This was it. This, Pontes, was the proof they were in the right place. The register confirmed that 2 guests had checked into that room. The poist hunt was no longer for records, but for people. Hackett knew that. Tracking down the motel's 2012 staff would be their only chance to put a face to the in their room. Finding former employees of a transient establishment 6 years later was its own kind of cold case. The old manager had deferred away. Most of the other names on the scant payroll records led to dead ends. People who had moved on, disappeared, or didn't want to be found. But after weeks of painstaking work, they located a woman named Beatrix Rowe. She had worked as a cleaner at the Starlight in 2012, and after some convincing, she agreed to speak with detectives. They met her at a small diner in a neighboring town. Beatrice was in her late 50s now, her face etched with the deflating lines of a hard life. She was hesitant. Her memories of the Starlight Inn, a peer chapter she had tried hard to close. At first, she claimed not to remember anything specific about that week in Slender. It was all a blur. It was all a blur of stained sheets and overflowing ashtrays. Hackett didn't push. He simply laid a photograph on the table between them.
It was the smiling picture of Asha. Then he laid down one of Milo. Beatrice stared at the photos.
Her hand holding a coffee cup began to tremble slightly.
The girl?
She said, her voice barely a
blame whisper.
I remember her. She seemed nice. Too nice for a place like this.
Stories unlocked by the faces began to surface in fragments. She remembered.
The couple in room 7, the young man Milo, seemed nervous, agitated.
The young woman, Asha, was quiet, watchful.
But it wasn't just them. There was a
Bing person.
He wasn't on the register.
Beatrice explained, her gaze distant, fixed on the past.
He showed up later, an older guy, hard. He had this look in his eyes, like a stray through dog that's only ever been kicked. Mean.
She couldn't remember his name or what published looked like in detail, only the feeling he gave her, a cold, predatory day. Steelersness.
He came and went from room 7 over a period of 2 days. The crucial memory came from the second night. Beatrice was finishing her shift late, pushing her cleaning cart down the outdoor Pompey way. As she passed room 7, she heard voices, an argument. It was loud, violent. The young man's voice high and desperate, and the older man's a low, guttural roar. She couldn't make out the words, just the low, terrifying sound of it. Then a sudden, heavy thud. It was a sound, so final, it made the hair on her arms stand up. After that, silence, and unnatural silence that felt louder than the shouting that preceded it. Beatrice confessed she had been terrified. She finished her work as quickly as she could and left, not looking back at the closed door of room 7. She didn't call the police. You didn't call the cops from the starlight, she said, a bitter resignation in her voice. That's how you got hurt, or worse. She told Hackett one last thing. A day or quarry 2 later, she couldn't be sure of the exact time, she saw the older, menacing man again. It was the very early hours of the morning before the sun had risen. She was arriving for her shift. She saw him conserve something long and heavy, wrapped in a blanket or a tarp, into the trunk of the silver sedan. The girl, Asha, was with him. Beatrice said she would never forget the look on her face. It was a hollow, vacant expression of pure terror, like a ghost. The man barked an order at her, and she got into the passenger seat without a word. Marriage man got behind the wheel, and the silver sedan pulled out of the Starlight's parking lot, disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness. Beatrice never saw the car, the man, or the young woman again. Hackett and his team listened in stunned silence. Beatrice's testimony was the Rosetta Stone for the entire case. It provided a witness, a timeline, and a narrative. Ahti wasn't a willing participant. She was a captive. Milo wasn't lost. He was murdered in that motel room, and the killer wasn't a phantom. He was a real tangible man who had driven away with a witness and a body in the trunk. The investigation now had a singular, urgent smelling to peel back 6 years of history and put a name to the hard, menacing face that haunted Beatrice's memory. Beatrice's chilling account from the mindlet informed the investigation from a what and where to a who. The menacing third man was no longer a phantom. He was the center of undertake for the entire case. Detective Hackett knew that identifying this man was the only path to finding Asha and achieving justice for Milo. The key, he reasoned, had to lie with Milo Radic. This wasn't a random encounter. Frustrations was there for a reason, and that reason was connected to the nervous young man from Arizona. The task force pivoted, launching a deep water dive into every aspect of Milo Radic's life. The initial 2012 investigation had painted him as a simple, good-natured outdoor enthusiast. But Hackett's team, armed with the knowledge of what happened in that motel room, peeled back the layers of that clean-cut image. They started with a forensic analysis of his finances, a painstaking process of subpoenaing 6-year-old bank records and credit card statements. For weeks, the link's number told a mundane story. Gas station purchases, grocery bills, payments to outdoor gear retailers, but Officer Diaz, the analyst who'd found on the business card, noticed a subtle but persistent anomaly. Alongside his legitimate income from a part-time job, there were regular, sizable cash deposits into his bank account. They were always just under the federal reporting threshold, a classic structuring pattern used to avoid suspicion. The deposits didn't align unthinkable employment. This was undeclared, untraceable money. Milo Radic had a secret source of income. The financial trail led them to re-examine his hiking trips, mapping out his travels over the 2 years before his death. They noticed another pattern. His trips often took him to remote trail, airheads near small secondary airports, or isolated industrial parks, places that had no scenic value but offered discreet access to transportation routes. The image of the carefree hiker began to crumble, replaced by a much more complex and dangerous picture. Milo wasn't just a company king. He was moving something. His backpack and his silver sedan were the perfect cover. He was a courier, a mule. Floating, the next question was, what was he moving and for whom? To answer that, they turned to his communication records. His primary cell phone records from 2012 had a mutation before, showing nothing suspicious. But technology had advanced. Flight Hackett's team was able to extract more data from the digital backups stored by the service provider. They focused on Zanzi phones, prepaid disposable phones often used for illicit activities.
They cross-referenced call logs from cell towers near Milo's known locations during his trips. It was a digital imaging needle in a hashtag search.
Correlating anonymous numbers that pinged the same towers as Milo's official phone. After 5 months of analysis, they found one recurring number.
A single unregistered disburner phone that was always active in the same areas as Milo. Its calls always brief and targeted. This wasn't a friend or family member. This was a handler.
So be their man. Tracing the ownership of a 6-year-old burner phone was considered nearly impossible, but the team got lucky. The phone had been purchased with a credit card at a big box store. Under subpoena, the store's parent company managed to retrieve the archived transaction data. The card belonged to a man named Dante Vos. The name hit the system like a lightning strike. Dante Vos, 24, had a long and violent criminal record stretching back 3 decades. Assault, intimidation, extortion. He was a career criminal, but a smart one. He was slippery, always managing to have charges dropped, witnesses change their whipping testimony, or evidence disappear. He had never been successfully convicted of a major felony, but law enforcement across 6 states knew him as a brutal enabler for larger criminal enterprises. His specialty was logistics, moving stolen goods quietly and efficiently. Physical description from his last booking photo was a perfect match for the hard, menacing man Beatrice Rowe had described. The pieces of the puzzle began snapping into place with breathtaking speed. The task force built unsinkable airwalking theory, a detailed narrative of what they believed happened. In September 2012, Mitch, Milo, entangled with Vos, was using his hiking trips as a cover to transport stolen high-end electronics. The cash, full deposits were his payment. But something went wrong. Perhaps Milo wanted a bigger cut. Or perhaps the burden of the secret life became too much. He wanted out. Knowing he couldn't face the volatile Vos alone, he confided in his new friend Asha, the one person who he felt understood him and existed outside of his dangerous secret life. To meet her in Utah, asking her to be there for moral support perhaps, as a witness or a safety net, believing her presence might temper Vos's reaction. It was a naive and tragically fatal miscalculation. The meeting at the Starlight Motor Inn was the confrontation. The argument Beatrice Rowe overheard was Milo telling Vos he was done. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, a hallmark of his Philippines criminal history, Vos lashed out, killing Milo in the confines of that squalid motel room. The heavy thud Beatrice heard was the sound of Milo's body hitting the floor. Asha, the intended safety net, was instantly flattened into the sole witness to a murder. Vos, a man skilled in self-preservation and violence, now had a problem he needed to solve. The theory explained everything. The 2 victims, the secret meeting, the location, and the chilling final image Beatrice had of a terrified Aisha being driven away by her friend's killer. The working theory was solid, a compelling and logical reconstruction of events. But it was just that, a theory. They had no physical evidence directly linking Vos to the motel room or to the bodies. Beatrix's testimony was powerful, but a defense attorney could shred it as the unreliable memory of a frightened woman from 6 years ago. To secure a conviction, they needed more. They needed to find Dante Vos. The focus of the investigation narrowed to a single, urgent manhunt for a ghost who had spent 6 years successfully stinging off. Finding a ghost like Dante Vos was never going to be easy. For 6 Janvier, He had successfully scrubbed his presence from the world, living off the grid, likely under a new name. The task force began the painstaking work of building a digital and financial profile of the man since 2012, looking for any mistake, any slip-up that would betray his current location. They sifted through mountains of data, searching for men matching his age and description who had appeared out of nowhere in late 2012, men with no prior history. It was a search for a phantom in a haystack of 40 million people. The break came not from a sophisticated algorithm, but from a mundane utility bill. An analyst cross-referencing Voss's known associates from his past criminal life found a name on a list of contacts from a 2010 case. The associate himself was now in prison, but the analyst had a hunch and ran the associate's relatives through a public record search. The associate's cousin had co-signed a rental application in 2013 for a small house in a quiet working-class suburb of Boise, Idaho. The primary applicant on the lease was a man named David Vossen. The age was a match, the move-in date was a match. It was a thin lead, but in months. A surveillance team was dispatched to Boise. The house stay was a modest single-story home with a neatly kept lawn and a small vegetable garden in the back. The man who lived there, David Vossen, was a quiet neighbor. He kept to himself, worked a cash-in-hand job for a local construction practitioner firm, and paid his rent on time. He looked like any other middle-aged man trying to get by. But when the surveillance team got a clear photograph and ran it through facial recognition against Dante Voss's old mugshot, they got a 98% match. They had found their ghost. There was no dramatic raid. Finally, Coachit wanted Voss intact and talking. On a quiet Tuesday morning in early 2020, 2 unmarked cars pulled up to the house. Hackett and another detective walked to the front door and knocked. When Dante Voss answered holding a cup of coffee, his eyes showed only a, quote, flicker of recognition before a mask of bored indifference fell over his features. He didn't run, he didn't, quote, flumming. When Hackett showed him the warrant, Voss simply turned, placed his coffee cup on the counter, and put his Frankfurt hands behind his back. The quiet suburban life of David Voss, quote, was over. The interrogation room was cold, sterile, and silent. Dante Voss sat at the metal table, uncuffed, looking more like a man inconvenienced by a traffic ticket than a suspect in a double homicide. He exuded a calm, practiced arrogance. For the first hour, he stonewalled every question with a simple, dismissive phrase. Never heard of him, never been presumption, you've got the wrong guy. He denied knowing Milo Radic. He denied knowing Asha Baduri. He claimed he'd never set foot in the state of Utah in his life. He was patient, confident, and utterly impenetrable. Hackett let him build his wall of lies, brick by brick. He listened, he nodded, and he waited. Then he began his own methodical construction. He didn't accuse, he presented facts. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were Milo Reddy's bank statements, with the cash deposit circled lashed in red. Let's talk about Milo's side income, Hackett said calmly. Voss shrugged. Kid probably had a weekend job. None of my business. Hackett slid another folder across the table. This one contained the cell tower data maps, showing the pings from the burner phone mirroring Milo's every move. This is your phone, Dante. We tracked it from the point of sale. Itbek was always with Milo, like a shadow. Voss's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, flooded the first crack in the facade. Then came the starlight motoring. Hackett laid out the crime scene photos of the recovered guest's leisure. He pointed to the entry for room 7 to the note about the silver, presumed Ciudad, Arizona plates. Milo's car, Dante, in your motel on the night he espied. Anyone could have been driving it, Voss countered, his voice losing some of its mixing earlier casualness. Kid probably loaned it to a friend. President, he was with a friend, Hackett agreed, his voice dropping slightly. A young woman. We have a witness, Dante. He didn't say Beatrix's name. He just let the word witness hang in the cold air. She worked at the motel. She remembers you. She remembers the argument coming from room 7. A loud, violent argument, then a thud, and then, presume, silence. Voss stared at Hackett, his eyes like chips of ice. He said nothing. She saw you leave, Dante, Hackett continued, pressing his advantage. In the middle of the night, she saw you putting something big and heavy into the trunk of Milo's car. And she saw the girl. She saw Asha Baduri get into the passenger seat. She said the girl looked like she had her soul scooped out, a ghost. That's what our witness saw. The room was utterly silent. Voss stared at the blank wall behind Hackett's head. The detective could see the calculations happening behind his cold eyes. He wasn't grappling with guilt. He was running the odds. He was a career criminal, assessing the strength of the cage being built around him. He wasn't grappling with... His confession was delivered in a cold, detached monotone, devoid of any emotion or remorse. He confirmed the task force's theory with chilling accuracy. He'd gotten scared and wanted out. He'd brought the girl Asha as backup. A move Voss described as admirers, exactly as they'd imagined. Milo trying to quit, Voss refusing. He got loud, Voss said simply, so I shut him up. He described killing Milo with a single brutal blow, as if describing fixing a leaky faucet. He then detailed the horror of the hours that followed. He admitted to terrorizing Asha, using her as an unwilling accomplice to clean the room and load Milo's body into the car. He confessed that he drove them to Silas Lake, a place he knew from a previous job, and forced the terrified young woman to help him wrap her friend's body in her own sleeping bag, to help him frustrations shut and chain on the weights. He spoke of the sexual assault not as a crime of passion, but as an act of dominance, a way to break a spirit completely. Hackett felt a cold sickness rise in him, but his face remained a mask of professional calm. And then what, Dombies? What happened to Asha? Voss fell silent again, a faint cruel smirk playing on. 그는 퍼즐의 마지막 조각, 칼린 바두리를 8년간 괴롭혔던 질문에 대한 답을 쥐고 있었다. 그는 다시 통제권을 되찾았다. 보장해달라고 그가 말했다. 고독한 보호감호. 내 안에 적들이 있어. 해킷은 협상하지 않았어. 네가 말해봐. 그는가 어디 있는지 알려주시면 검찰의 요청을 전달하겠습니다. 제가 할 수 있는 건 그게 전부입니다. 보스, 그는 이 점을 생각하는 듯했다. 그러고는 고개를 끄덕였다. 펜과 종이 좀 가져와, 경찰관이 말했다. 그는 종이 한 장과 펜을 가져왔습니다. 6년간 고통과 불확실성의 소용돌이를 만들어낸 단테 보슨. 그는 테이블 위로 몸을 기울였다. 마치 간단한 장보기 목록을 작성하듯 그는 흔들리지 않는 손으로 조잡한 지도를 그리기 시작했다. 유민의 유타주와 네바다주 경계에 있는 황량한 사막의 흙길을 보여주는데 바위와 과목이 있는 곳입니다. 필리핀 호수에서 수백 마일 떨어진 곳에 있는 덤불. 그는 작은 바위 덩어리를 그리고 깔끔한 X자 하나를 그렸습니다. 그는 종이를 테이블 너머로 밀어냈어. 거기서 그녀를 찾을 수 있을 거야. 네비테 보스가 손으로 그린 지도는 잔인한 유물이었고 어떤 장소를 안내하는 조잡한 안내서였습니다. 상상할 수 없는 슬픔. 그것은 햇깃 청사와 팀을 이끌었습니다. FBI 요원과 법의학 전문가들은 유타 북부의 산과 호수에서 벗어나 광활하고 용서할 수 없는 깊은 곳으로 향합니다. 그레이트 베이슨 사막의 텅 빈 풍경은 흑백 파노라마처럼 펼쳐져 있었습니다. 희미한 흙과 회색 관목이 수평선까지 뻗어 있었고 그 아래 반짝이는 끊임없이 내리쬐는 늦여름의 태양. 그곳은 자연이 모든 것을 지워버리도록 설계한 곳이었다. 물건을 통째로 삼키려고 SUV 차량 행렬이 먼지 기둥을 일으켰다. 보스가 기억 속에서 스케치한 희미해진 흙길 네트워크를 따라 항해하면서 마이크로스코픽 진전은 느렸다. 지도의 랜드마크, 녹슨 물탱크, 번개에 그을린 노간주나무, 갈림길 겨낸 스미다. 도로는 모든 것이 똑같아 보이는 풍경 속에서 너무나 일반적이었습니다. 럭펠러, 이틀 동안 숨 막힐 듯한 더위 속에서 수색을 이어갔다. 팀원들은 굳은 결의로 어두운 표정을 지었다. 칼린 바두리, 더위순이다. 전화 통보를 받았다. 그는 오리건주에서 전화기 옆에서 기다렸다. 그는 희미한 빛과 희미한 빛 사이의 고통스러운 림보 상태에 갇힌 채였다. 희망과 가장 깊은 두려움. 둘째 날 오후 선두 차량에 있던 요원이 그것을 발견했습니다. 보스가 있는 곳 바로 앞에 3개의 큰 풍화된 암석지대가 뚜렷하게 모여 있었습니다. 소리라고는 바람소리와 똑딱거리는 소리뿐이었다. 메시이아, 냉각 엔진. 팀은 배에서 내렸고 그들의 부츠는 건조하고 갈라진 땅 위에서 바스락거렸다. 그들은 줄을 서서 느리고 체계적인 격자 탐색을 시작했으며 눈으로 땅을 살피며 방해물이나 땅의 어떤 부분도 찾지 못했습니다. 프리머넌스입니다. 것과는 달라 보였다. 1시간이 지났다. 그때 한 요원이 덥시. 그는 가장 큰 바위 밑부분 근처에 얕은 움푹 들어간 곳을 가리켰다. 흙은 약간 더 어둡고 더 추른 주변 지역보다 땅이 더 빽빽하게 압축되어 있었고 뿌리가 깊이 박힌 잡초 몇 개가 거칠고 직사각형 모양으로 자랐습니다. 거의 눈에 띄지 않는 8년 동안 거의 아물었던 땅에 생긴 흉터. 브리스탈리스입니다. 법의학팀. 그들은 먼저 소를 사용하여 표면 잔해물을 치운 다음 조용히 경건하게 작업했습니다. 작은 모종삽을 이용해 흙을 조심스럽게 긁어냈다. 작업은 느렸다. 섬세했다. 몇 분이 몇 시간처럼 느껴졌다. 그때 모종삽이 부드러운 무언가를 쳤다. 프로시큐파는 것이 멈췄다. 뚜껑 법의 인류학자는 무릎을 꿇고 조심스럽게 손을 사용하여 남은 흙을 부드럽게 털어냅니다. 먼저 희미해진 천조각이 나타났습니다. 허저잼이 여전히 알아볼 수 있을 만큼 보라색이었다. 그리고 뼈가 나타났다. 수색은 끝났다. 그들은 아샤바두리를 발견했습니다. 단테 보스는 마지막 비밀을 약간 발리어서 더 안전한 생활을 하기 위해 1급 살인, 납치, 성폭행 혐의로 유죄 판결을 받았습니다. 압센티 그의 종신형은 그가 감옥에서 죽을 것을 보장했습니다. 법적 절차는 정의감을 가져다 주었지만 칼린 바두리에게는 허무한 승리였습니다. 8년간의 미스터리의 끝은 안도의 순간이 아니라 그가 겪었던 상실에 대한 최후의 압도적인 확인이었습니다. 매일매일 살아가도록 강요당했습니다. 마침내 그는 자신의 발리어서 딸을 집으로 데려가 차갑고 익명의 사막이 아닌 평화의 장소에 안치하고 마지막 잔혹한 일을 마무리했습니다. 자랑스러운 아버지의 사진과 딸의 아름답고 희망찬 미소로 시작된 이야기의 한 장.